Hi, I'm Pete Van Deusen, founder of Brain Trainer International. Today, we're going to talk about a popular diagnosis called ADHD, Attention Deficit Hyperactivity Disorder. And I'll tell you the stories of two young men, Thomas and Jack, both diagnosed with ADHD by competent professionals, and both of whom overcame it in a matter of months in just a few hours a week. They did all this 30 years ago. Like most mental health diagnoses, ADHD is simply a description of symptoms. If you struggle to pay attention or be calm and still in busy environments, you've probably been diagnosed by parents, teachers, family members, maybe even by yourself. You don't need to be a clinician. If you have the symptoms, you have the disease. What causes these symptoms? Well, even MDs and therapists don't know. How can you resolve the problem if you don't know what's causing it? The doctors will offer a cocktail of psychoactive drugs. Therapists and coaches will meet with you over and over to talk about it. If you've ever tried these mental health options, you already know that none of them will actually fix the problem. You keep taking the drugs or having their sessions for years. They may help you to learn to live with your disorder, but they can't help you live without it. Well, I have an advantage over the experts. I'm not a doctor or a therapist, but I've spent the past 30 plus years helping children, adolescents, and adults to change themselves in lasting ways by doing something that the experts have been taught is impossible. I've actually done it myself and seen the effects in my life. I've taught professionals and home users around the world to work with a simple, sensible, natural, non-invasive way to change the course of their lives. Yes, many of the people I've taught have been therapists, but at least as many have done the work themselves or for family members. So today I'm going to offer you a different way of understanding attention and impulse control problems, and a way of actually fixing them without the labeling, without the invasive drugs or the impotent therapies. Clinicians like to call the process neurofeedback or EEG biofeedback therapy and make it mysterious and complicated. I prefer to call it brain training. And my company spent decades developing our state-of-the-art technology to be cost-effective and easy to use for anyone who can use a computer. Stay with me here, and I believe you'll understand why and how brain training can give you a tool to change yourself in many ways. During my early years of brain training, I saw a lot of ADHD. Ritalin and Dexedrine were the miracle drugs that were being pushed, and suddenly what had been a rare childhood diagnosis became an epidemic. Thomas was 11, Jack was 9. Thomas was quiet and withdrawn. Jack was the life of any party. Thomas fell asleep in minutes, but required hours to fully wake up. Jack took hours to fall asleep, but he would wake up at 5 a.m. ready to go for the day. Thomas struggled in his schoolwork, drifting into daydreams in class and taking hours to complete his most basic homework. Jack was aware of everything around him and learned quickly, but was easily bored and distracted. Thomas had dealt with bedwetting, while Jack had restless legs. It would have been hard to find two boys more different than these two, but both were diagnosed with ADHD. They bothered their teachers and parents by their inability to perform at their major job as kids, excel in school. I was very interested in what my mentor, Joel Lubar, called brain activation patterns. Doctors and therapists had no idea what those might be, but even in those relatively primitive days of brain training, I had a basic EEG technology that allowed me to see them. Almost immediately, it became clear that their brains were extremely different. Now, let's take a moment to understand how brain energy works and how different that is from the common mental health approaches. Psychology focuses on the mind. Psychiatry focuses on brain chemistry. Brain training recognizes that the brain controls the mind and brain energy controls chemistry. Since we have the ability to measure and track brain energy patterns real time, just as we can track heart energy, training the brain like any other part of the body gives us the power to understand and change each individual. We don't have to try and make up a normal mind or person, and we don't have to try to change the system by invading it with chemicals. We can simply guide the brain to change itself. You see, energy brains are chaotic systems. There's no such thing as a normal or average brain. Each brain is made up of hundreds of subsystems that work together using a natural process called feedback. Even more important, each brain creates itself from its earliest time in the womb to its most recent experiences. No two brains have the same DNA, and no two experience the same world as they move through life. Each brain is as unique as a fingerprint, so the concept of a normal brain is meaningless. You know that you can tell a lot about a person by watching the energy levels in the heart. Some hearts beat fast, others more slowly. In fact, depending on what you're doing at any given moment, the energy level changes within a given range. If you're a couch potato or if you're a marathon runner, your energy options will be different. But the amazing part of working with energy systems is that you can change them by training them. If a couch potato starts jogging, over time, the level of resting energy and the level of maximum capacity change. How do you train them? Using feedback, you pay attention to your pulse, how fast your heart is beating. Exercising to make it beat faster or more slowly, you can literally change yourself in a lasting way. The brain is a much more complex system, but it can be measured by focusing on how fast its neurons are firing their electrical pulses, where and how efficiently they're firing, and how effectively they work together. By using neurofeedback to train brain patterns, it's possible to help clients make lasting changes in the automatic ways they think, feel, act, and perform. Your doctor or therapist may tell you that your inability to stay focused is abnormal. It's a pathology. But once you understand the effects of the energy patterns in your brain and how they've developed, you recognize that those automatic responses, they're not disorders, they're habits. And you alone can change your energy habits by training. In simple terms, your brain's energy levels can be divided into several categories. They're measured in terms of pulses the brain cells fire in a second, how much energy they're producing. Firing once per second is called 1 hertz. When we talk about ADHD, there are several speeds that are important. When your brain cells are firing slowly, say between 3 and 7 hertz, a speed we call theta, several things are true. First, your awareness is mostly internal. You don't have enough energy to be aware of yourself and focus on what's happening around you. Second, you think in images instead of words. A picture is worth 1,000 words, they say. So this kind of thinking is very efficient, but not good for logical, rational thought you need for school. Internal image-based thought is daydreaming. When your brain produces lots of theta, you're likely to be more creative and more intuitive. And that's not what the schools are looking for. As you probably already realized, Thomas's brain was stuck in these slow theta frequencies. When he was required to read or listen for details, his brain couldn't speed up and maintain the higher energy levels. He drifted inside himself. He simply didn't have the energy necessary to process language. Socially, he couldn't stay in contact with conversations around him, so he appeared shy and withdrawn. And since the slow speeds are only one step up from sleep, dropping down into sleep was very easy, but speeding up into waking speeds, that took a long time. Earlier in his life, his sleeping brain was so far from being awake that he couldn't recognize when he needed to go to the bathroom, so he wet the bed. The standard speed of brain cells while you're wide awake is 15 to 22 hertz, 3 to 5 times faster than theta. Those speeds are called beta. They appear when the brain needs to focus externally and think with words. Jack's brain produced theta, but it made much more beta. He was aware of everything going on around him, and there was a constant chatter in his mind. More importantly, brains can also fire too fast, above 23 hertz. Jack's brain had a very high level of that speed called hypervigilance, thinking too fast and too much. For Jack's brain to slow down into sleep speeds required a long time. At the same time, his brain was producing lots of energy even when he slept, so he was able to come fully awake almost immediately. Between the slow and fast speeds, there are two bands of frequencies which are not used for processing, but for pure awareness. From 8 to 12 hertz, a speed called alpha, appears when you are mentally quiet and present in the moment. The faster middle speeds, from about 12 to 15 hertz, are called sensory motor rhythm, or SMR. They occur when the body is still and relaxed. When you come to a stoplight in your car, the engine doesn't stop running. It goes into a very efficient state called idling, wasting no energy, but ready to respond as soon as you step on the accelerator. Middle frequencies are the brain's idling speeds. They allow you to be when you don't need to be doing. Jack's hyperactivity and restless leg syndrome reflected exactly that inability to be still. Jack's motor simply didn't have the ability to idle. He was always revving. His mind was never still. His body was never relaxed. Thomas was stuck in the speed below alpha, so he was not able to be present outside himself for more than a few seconds at a time. Because we could see in their maps of brain energy how their brains work differently, and we could recognize how their brain energy habits affected their lives, we were able to train their brains completely differently and produce different results. We didn't care that the experts called them ADHD. The name meant nothing. Our focus was on the goals each of these young men had for improving their lives. Thomas had been sent to a private school when he couldn't deal with public education. Even though he was clearly very intelligent, he'd already been held back in his first year of private school from the others in his age group. Going into that first summer, his parents had been told he would be moved into special education classes with autistic and head-injured children at the beginning of the next year. He was embarrassed, but he didn't argue. He accepted that there was something wrong with him. When we discussed his goals for training, I surprised him and his mother by telling them that my goal was for him to avoid being sent to special ed and to become a strong student in the standard classes. Thomas struggled with that idea for several weeks. He couldn't believe it was possible. And his mom was concerned that we shouldn't set our targets too high. She'd learned to accept what everyone had told her. After 3 or 4 weeks of training, though, both of them began to recognize the changes that were happening in him. I finally got her to speak with the school and tell him she wanted him tested again at the end of the summer. They were not supportive of the idea, but finally accepted that they would consider it. Jack's brain, on the other hand, was very fast, always racing, even up into the hypervigilant speeds. However, he produced no middle frequencies, especially the SMR speeds. This explained why he struggled to quiet his brain enough to go to sleep. Jack was considered a behavioral problem. He was smart and learned quickly, but his lack of control created problems for other students in his class. When we talked about his goals, they all related to others in his life. He wanted his soccer coach to stop yelling at him, wanted his parents and teachers to stop complaining all the time. He was frustrated with how boring school was, and he felt that his classmates couldn't keep up with him. It took several sessions of my focusing on trying to get to a goal that could motivate him. Finally, he admitted that he was hurt by the fact that he never got invited to birthday parties. The word had gotten around among the other parents that he was impossible to manage and often ended up getting into fights or breaking things. Thomas's training plan involved training his brain to reduce the amount of slow activity and increase the ability to sustain faster speeds. We created some games for him to play at home, where he practiced naming items in his environment out loud and seeing how many he could get in a fixed period of time. As he practiced during sessions, it was clear that when he had to recognize an item and then say its name, use language, there were bursts of fast activity. In his first trial, he was able to name only 13 items in 1 minute. But over several weeks, he succeeded in naming 140 items in 3 minutes, increasing his speed and the ability to sustain the faster speeds. He also practiced reading out loud from a school book. In the beginning, I would have him read 4 words, then I would read 4 to allow him to rest. But he had to point to each word as we read it. As he increased his ability to produce beta speeds, he was able to read a whole page. Most of Thomas's training was done over the summer vacation, so there was no academic environment to test him. He was coming out of himself at home and slowly began to establish friendships. He spent the last few weeks of the summer working with a tutor to help him catch up on material he had been unable to learn the first time around. He even practiced taking the kind of test he would be given. And everyone began to believe that he would do well if tested again. His mother refused to accept the unwillingness of the school to retest him, and eventually they agreed. His training ended just before the school year started. He was tested and not only avoided going into special education, he actually skipped ahead a year and rejoined his original age group. Jack's training focused on reducing the very fast activity in his brain and increasing his natural ability to control his body. He trained to decrease fast activity and increase SMR. I had developed a game called Dominoes for working with SMR. Jack would sit cross-legged in the training chair while the software gave his brain feedback when his middle frequencies were improving. I would stack dominoes on his legs, arms, shoulders, and head while he practiced slow breathing. If he fidgeted, the dominoes would fall and I'd have to replace him. At the end of a 3-minute exercise, I'd take a Polaroid picture of him, then count the dominoes as I removed them. He had to remain calm during the picture and the removal. He had noticed in his first visit the bulletin board in the training room covered with photos of people playing dominoes. Each time he made a new record, I'd write the number on the picture and post it in place of his prior picture. The old record would go home and be placed on the refrigerator so everyone could track his progress. His first few attempts allowed him to keep only the easiest dominoes, maybe 8 or 10. But as he continued training, he reached above 20 and was able to sit completely still. His parents noticed that he was falling asleep more easily, and the complaints from his teachers were being reduced. His mother mentioned during one session that he still struggled during the sermon at church. When Jack and I were together, I suggested he should play dominoes in church. Of course, he would need to use invisible dominoes, and he'd have to keep the count. But I showed him that his brain knew how to do it even without the computer. In his next session, I asked him how the experiment had gone. He told me he'd gotten 46 dominoes and kept them on the whole time the pastor was talking. I asked his mother after the session. She had to think back, but then she realized that he had been completely different during the service, though she'd never mentioned anything to him. Jack also played the naming game, but his challenge was not speed, it was control. He had to remain still instead of pointing and jumping out of his chair until he too could do 140 names in 3 minutes without stopping. When we videotaped our graduation session with Jack and his parents, I asked the parents, then Jack, what had been the issues that brought him to training in the first place and what had changed during the process. The parents mentioned his improvement in sports, the ability to stay focused on homework, the changes noticed by his teacher, and his improved grades. Jack mentioned that his soccer coach, his teacher, and his parents seemed to have become more reasonable. But then he closed by saying, "But I don't think the exercises had anything to do with that." His parents immediately responded, but I interrupted. I think what Jack is saying is he's not doing anything different. He's not using any tricks or techniques, but the outcome has changed. His experience before that he was just being himself, and he's still just being himself. But the automatic Jack is getting different results. That's the whole goal of training. I did ask his mom to stay behind after the meeting, and I told her about the birthday party wish. She agreed to begin scheduling play dates where one friend at a time with the friend's mother would spend time with them so the mother could see the new Jack. And she also agreed to have a birthday party for him with a number of his friends and their moms to start changing his reputation. I got an email from her several months later telling me that Jack had gotten several invitations to birthdays in the past few weeks. As expected, Jack didn't seem to notice. He just went on being himself in a world that had learned to accept him better. I left Atlanta and moved to Miami in late 2000. One morning, just before lunch, I was visited in the office by two people I recognized but couldn't place. It was Thomas and his mom. They had stopped by to tell me that he had graduated with his class, been accepted into a college, and was pursuing a degree in engineering. He was a different person from the shy boy I had known. He was self-assured, quietly proud of himself. His incurable ADHD was a thing of the past. And as they thanked me, I reminded them that he and his parents had done all the work. He had changed his own brain habits and created a new life for himself. No more ADHD, no more drugs. I don't work with clients anymore, but I still hear from brain trainers around the world, many of them professionals, many others home trainers who worked with their families or themselves. Stories like those of Thomas and Jack. They're stories of people who tried diagnoses, tried drugs and therapies, and finally decided to try the impossible, changing their own energy patterns in lasting ways in a few hours a week over several months. People who took a chance on training their brains like any other part of their bodies. People like Thomas and Jack, who didn't learn any tricks or techniques to help them achieve what they wanted from their lives. People who just changed the automatic ways they lived their lives and transformed their futures. Come see us at brain-trainer.com when you're ready to become the you most want to be.